Alright, so as promised, I'm going to be doing some videos over your FRQs after they are submitted, and then we're going to go over, that's weird, hold on 1 second. We're going to go over what is good, what is bad, and whether they might score or not. And this isn't going to be super in-depth for the start because, well, it's a little it's a lot of practice. Obviously, you're going to get graded for this, but mostly because these don't have legitimate responses or answers to them because they are the ones that are made up by me or other teachers. So I could come up with my best answers, but I'm not sure if they would be the same answers that would score on the actual test. Plus, right now we don't know what it's going to be. If it's going to be like FRQs like this, like the one you're seeing on the screen here, or if it's going to be short answer questions where they have like a bunch of short answer questions where it's just a little prompt and maybe one vocab word or two vocab words. I don't know what it's going to be, but they're going to be about the skills you guys need and not the content because you guys will be able to use your books. Um, that being said, this is the first time I've talked to you since the announcement about the closures for the rest of the year, and I know about half of you are seniors, and I'm sorry. I don't know what to tell you guys. It sucks. I know. I wish I could provide you guys with a better education and better um, tools for this. If you don't have computers, hopefully you're going to the school and talking to the school about getting a computer loaned to you for the remainder of the school year. Um, I know, I think like a couple of you were on the list and you guys didn't pick them up, so make sure you're paying attention. If you got the call and you said yes, you need one, make sure you're paying attention for the next pickup. But I will know more Friday about what this is going to look like, which is why this week is kind of just FRQ practice. I don't know what the test is going to look like, but Friday we will know more about my IAP test and all AP tests. So please keep a lookout for that. I hope you're all watching this. And if I remember what else I was going to talk about, I'll talk about that. But right now we're going to get into the practice. So here's the FRQ prompt, and I'll read it. It says, that doesn't really help anything. Watch the video. Watch the video. Some of you guys gave me responses, and your responses aren't very good. They're not bad, but they're not as good as they could be because you didn't watch the video. And I'm assuming it'll still be like an FRQ, so we'll just go with the way that video goes. And I'm not going to make a video about it because that video talking about sodas and the little acronym for how to write this is a good video. So answer the FRQ. Caesar Rodney School District wants to implement a new policy that teachers must limit homework to a reasonable amount to reduce stress. Something I've done. The school randomly assigns the teachers into two conditions. Half of the teachers were required to decrease the amount of homework they assigned. The other half proceeded to keep the same amount of homework that they usually assign. At the end of the year, the administration assessed students' stress levels and concluded that the less homework does minimize student stress. So, right off the bat, what you should do is pay attention that they're talking about an experiment. They're talking about Unit 2 for us, but it's Unit 1 in the actual organization of what they're talking about. So it's Unit 1, which have been in the videos on YouTube. And you understand this experiment. And think about experiments, you need to know what an experiment is and what it can do and what it cannot do. And they're talking about here, they say concluded. Concluded is a big word where whenever you're reading about a study in a journal or media or news or whatever it is, make sure you're paying attention to the word. They made the conclusion, concludes or confirms. That's a big word. That's very important in science. So that might be a bit of a stretch for what they're doing here. So what it says is identify one aspect of the study that's an experiment. So what makes an experiment? Identify the independent variable. Easy enough. Explain the possible operational definition of the independent variable. People were confused about that, so we'll see how you guys did on those. I haven't really looked at all of these, so we'll look at them together. Identify the dependent variable. Easy enough as well. You guys have the books. That's easy enough to find. Explain one operational definition, again, of the dependent variable. And describe two possible confounding variables in the experiment. So how many points is this worth if you were taking the actual AP test? Well, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 points. You would need 2 for the last point, not 2 points separately. That's 1 point. So that's why I put 6 points on this. So you get a point for doing each part of it. Remember, according to SOTAs, you apply, you define, and then you apply. So it says, I can't remember what S stands for, but organize, define, apply, and summarize. Or I think S was summarize. Or summarize. S was summary. What was your summary of it? Um, anyways, but all you need in that SOTAs technically is define and apply. And you don't even need define. All you need to do to get a point is apply, which is technically one sentence, maybe two, to get a good application. But you should never be doing more than 4, like the video says. So here we go. I'm not going to say who this is. If it's you, don't take offense to it. This is just the way it is. Just understand I'm just going over the people that I just pick some random people out of here. So first thing is to go for the first bullet point. So this person said an experiment is when an independent variable is manipulated and a dependent variable is measured. A little bit of a simplistic version explanation for what an experiment is, just basically saying because the dependent variable is measured off of what? So an independent variable is measured too, but the change in the variable is measured. The difference in the variable is what's measured. So just a little bit simplistic there, but it doesn't matter because that's not what the point is. The point is identify one aspect of the study that makes an experiment. They said one aspect of the study that makes an experiment is the random assignment. That's not necessarily true because random assignment, I guess that's a stretch for me because you can randomly assign in a survey too, and you can give two different surveys and see how the response is, and that can technically be your experiment. But what you should say to make the point, again, this is a made up question, not actually one from College Board, so it's a little bit hard, but technically it works. But it would definitely work if you said a study that makes an experiment, one that makes an experiment is the fact that it's a random assignment to the independent variables, who has more work given and who has less work given. So if you talk about making people assigning them to what it is, what does it mean by random assignment? So if you talk about if you talk about the independent and dependent variables, that's what you need to make sure you understand that it's experiment. Experiments have independent and dependent variables. So it's a little bit of a stretch to say that one works, but I guess it works. An independent variable, so second point, an independent variable is what is being manipulated in the study. In this scenario, the independent variable is the amounts of homework. Good enough. That's the point. An operational definition is a statement of the procedure. Again, they're defining and they're applying. You don't need to define to get the point, but it helps support that you know what you're talking about in your application. An operational definition is a statement of the procedures or ways in which a researcher is going to measure behaviors or qualities. So the big part is measuring, but measuring what? So you need how are you measuring the variables is what you should have said. To make this easier, the definition is not important anyways, but to make it easier, the definition should be measures variables. Also, you get to use your book. That's fantastic. If you are using the definition from the book, it's not going to help you. They're going to throw that out the window. They don't care about your definition. Come up with your own definition. If you're copying it word for word from the book, it isn't going to help you, so don't do that. Make sure you come up with your own definition. Not that it matters right now, but try to. In the scenario, one possible operational definition of the independent variable is worksheets handed out to students. So the measuring the amount, they should have said some kind of amount, just to make sure you've got to use proper terminology in your application. You can't just say independent variable worksheets handed out to students. What do you mean worksheets handed out to students? Just what the worksheet is, what the worksheet says. It should say the amount or how many worksheets or the difficulty of the worksheets or something like that. But again, we're talking about more or less homework, so we're talking about amount of worksheets. So again, Some things that would make this better is if they said in the scenario that operational definition of the independent variable, which was homework, amount of homework, was the number of worksheets given out by each teacher. That would be fine. That'd be make this better. I'm not going to go over other options because we're just going to read other ones and see what would work. The dependent variable is what is being measured. Technically, you're measuring the amount of worksheets too, so that's not a great definition of dependent variable. Um, uh, in this case, the stress levels of the students are being measured. So the definition is not great because you're measuring two things. You're measuring the amount of homework given and the amount of stress afterwards. So dependent variable would be better to say the amount of change from the independent variable that is being measured. So it's the amount of change dependent on the independent variable, the different independent variables, different levels of independent variables. So you have to tie dependent variable into independent variable. So in this case, the stress levels of the students are being measured in relationship to the amount of homework. So you need to be talking about how it relates to the independent variable. That's what's being measured, not just stress levels. You're trying to compare the stress level to homework, not just stress level, because right now a lot of you are stressed and you may not be doing any homework at all. So you need to relate the stress to the homework, because stress could be caused by other things. So make sure you're tying those two things together. An operational definition of the independent variable is stress levels. Variable stress levels is raised blood pressure. So they're measuring blood pressure. That's good enough for me. I like that. So you're going to measure blood pressure. You could do other options as simple as saying, we're going to do a survey once a week and talk about stress levels for each student or each class, because you're doing it by class. Or you can talk about just at the end of every homework assignment, the scale. They're given a scale. How stressed are you from 1 to 10 every day, or when you walk into the class? This is a Likert scale. You can mention Likert scale. Good for points. Next pet. That would score. This one would probably score, but it's a bit of a stretch for me. This one I don't think would score because you're just says worksheets handed out to students, the amount of worksheets handed out to students, and it doesn't measure what the independent variable is. So it's a bit of a stretch to make this one work. So we have a point here. I would say a point. I said it was a stretch, but I think a point here for sure. No point here. Point. Point here. Point here. So I think they're only really missing 1 point, maybe 2. Confounding variables are the factors, and I'll come up with an actual score for you guys when I grade these. Are factors other than independent variables that may cause a result. In this scenario, that may cause a result. That's not very good definition. In this scenario, 2 possible confounding variables are personal issues. That's good. And age. Personal issues such as your parents arguing daily. Again, you didn't mention confounding variables are factors other than independent variable that may cause a result. Result in what? That may cause a change in the dependent variable. That you have to talk about how confounding variables changes your dependent variable. Independent variable is supposed to change it. That's what you want to change it. But result, what do you mean result? What is a result? You never mentioned result before here. So what is a result? That may cause a change in the dependent variable that you didn't want, an unwanted change, or something along those lines. In this scenario, 2 possible confounding variables are personal issues that might cause stress, like parents arguing daily. You got to go back to the dependent variable, causing stress. So you need to go back to how parents arguing daily causing stress. Mention causing stress. Which is really upsetting. And trigger stress. Okay, never mind. They did it. I just forgot it was over here. So yes, that causes stress. So there you go. That's part of your point. And age is confounding because students of high school age suffer heightened stress as opposed to those of middle-aged school age. Age being a stressor, I guess that's a bit of a stretch for me. I get that you guys believe you have more stress, and you do. Just because you're more aware of it, you guys put more weight on your grades than a younger kid does, because things matter. You're an adult now. You become an adult, so it matters more to you. So you put stress on it. I see what you're saying, and I think this again. You need two things, two confounding variables. I think this gets the point. I think age is a bit of a stretch on that, but I see what you're saying, and I would give it the point. I think a better one might be um, uh, amount of work, if a student's working or not. That could be a confounding variable. Easy one. But I think it gets a point. So overall, one missed for sure, in my opinion, and maybe two missed. But remember, if you're getting 2 or 3 out of 6 or 7, which are usually what they are, you are at the average. So if you're getting 4 out of 6, which we are saying is 4 for sure out of 6 on this one, you're way above average. You're doing fine. You're going to pass. So that's still fine. Perfect. Next one. These are two different ones here and here. FRQ. So experiments must have, we're going back to the start again. Experiments must have variables in order to control the experiment and lower the chance of confounding variables and a control. The wording there is not right. Variables in order to control the experiment and lower the chance of confounding variables. And they must have a control, is that what you're saying? They must have a control group. So they don't have that, but I think you should make sure you say they must have a control group, because this control is not the same as this control. This control is a verb and this control is a noun. So make sure you're understanding that you're saying you're trying to control something, and this right here is the control variable. Or sorry, control variable. They have those. But control group is what you meant to say, I would assume. This experiment has an independent variable, the amount of homework, and dependent variable, the student's stress levels. And you should have said which makes an experiment. Just so you guys know, this is not an experiment. And it says at the end of the year, the administration assessed the students' stress levels and concluded that the less stress does minimize student stress. Less homework does minimize student stress. Can't do that, because all they've been doing is, I'm assuming, a survey, and they never really said what the operational definition is, and we don't know. It sounds a lot like they can say there is a correlation, and they have a correlational study. More homework means more stress, but how do you do that without, like you said, we're going to find out there's way too many confounding variables. This is not an experiment. At least it's not a good one. This is a great correlational study, but there's no way to prove it with what the prompt is. It is not an experiment. This is just a prompt asking why it would be or why it would not be. In my opinion, it is definitely not an experiment. It's a bad one if it is. So again, this person just forgot the wording here, saying this experiment has, I guess they said the experiment has independent variable and the amount of homework and a dependent variable of student stress. So that's why an experiment. So the wording is a little bit off, but I think it gets a point. An independent variable is one thing. You should just say a variable, not one thing. I just make sure you're using academic vocabulary. It's a variable that changes in the experiment. In this case, the thing that's changed is the amount of homework. Things not that changes. That's you're gonna mess up your point right here. It's a thing that you change in order to control the dependent variable. In order that you change, that you hold, that you control, saying the thing that you control the change of, to then impact the change in the dependent variable. So your wording is not very good here. Is one thing that changes the experiment. In this case, the thing that just changes the amount of homework that is changed. I guess it sounds like you mean that you control it, but dependent variable changes too. So that's a bit of a stretch. That might not get the point. So maybe no point on that one. Operational variable is how the experiment. It sounds like I'm nitpicking here, but this is what happens. You guys got to be very academic in your vocabulary. Operational variable is how experimenter, and this is an easy one anyways, so you might get the points. I don't know. Operational definition is how the experimenter defines the different variables. So you messed up here, but that's not going to lose you a point. Don't worry about that. The experimenter could define the amount of homework by how much the teacher usually gives and cutting in half. So counting the amount of homework they give. You should have, again, a little more specific here, but I think it gets the point. So count I would say, count the amount of homework given in a week and cut that in half, or ever in a month and cut that in half. Also, that what makes this a bad experiment, we'll get to confounding variables in a second, is the fact that some teachers already don't give very much homework and some teachers already give a lot. So a teacher who gives a lot, cutting in half, might still be more than a teacher who barely gave any in the first place. So this is not very well controlled, so makes it a bad experiment. That's a confounding variable. The confounding variable meaning, what do teachers give it normally? How do you cut that in half if you don't know if all teachers aren't at a baseline in the beginning? Half for one person could be a lot more than half for another person. Anyways, that's my point. So I think that gets a point though. Dependent variable is the variable that is measured after the experiment. In this experiment, it is the stress levels of the students. It's not after the experiment, it's during the experiment. Because you're going to be doing this over time. It says over a year, so you're measuring it during the experiment. I guess it could be after, but I would just get rid of that. Dependent variable is the variable that is measured after. Here's how you should have said. This is the best way to. After the independent variable is controlled for. So after the amount of homework is controlled for. In this case, the amount of stress levels of students, depending on the amount of homework, relate the dependent variable back to the independent variable. You got to do that. I don't think this gets the point. Maybe it does. If it's a simple one, maybe it does. Maybe this is a point. Let's say maybe two gone right now. The operational variable would be defined by a test that the students take, and the score would be measures of the stress levels. By a test, you're giving the students who have a lot of stress a test. So you should say a test measuring stress levels. Be specific, because it sounds like you're just giving them a school test. So they did a bunch of homework, now they have a test on the homework. So you should have said a survey, not a test. You're not giving them a test, because tests don't. Yeah, it'd be a survey or a questionnaire or a Likert scale or something like that. But test isn't the proper word. But I think it gets the point still. It's just not the proper word I would use. Still gets the point. Confounding variables are things that could affect the outcome and was a variable that was not accounted for. Good definition. Two possible confounding variables are the student's home life and subject difficulty. It says describe to, so I don't think that's describing the two. So I think those are great answers, but they're not described. Student's home life, that could impact it because he has more stress at home because of family situations. And subject difficulty, meaning math might be more difficult for a student and that makes more stress even if it has less homework. So you did not describe them, you just gave me two. So I don't think I got the point. Sorry. So I think you got 3 out of 6 for sure. Maybe a little bit iffy on this one, but 3 or 4 out of 6. I would say 3 out of 6 on this one. I don't think you described it. Sorry. I think you gave me 2, but they're not described. So next one, and I'll go a little bit faster. I got quite a few more, but I want to go over these different formats. So heads up, this format on this one, good. It has this. Oh, sorry. Summarize. What is the article talking about? Organize the information. Define, apply, and space. The other S is space. They have the space, wonderful. They have the space, wonderful. They do not have the space on this one. Makes it harder to read, harder to grade. Especially for those of you doing the AP test and you had the option to take pictures of it and send that in. Don't do it like this. If you're writing, make sure you leave space, because some of your writing is not very pretty. If your writing is not pretty, you better type it. If you're obviously if you're doing the actual AP test, you write it anyways. But if you're taking a picture of it, a picture of your writing is not going to look good. An experiment is a research method in which an investigation manipulates variables to observe the effect of some behavior. That's a pretty good way to do it. It doesn't have to be a behavior though. It could be, I guess, behavior would be scientific too. Behavior of chemicals. So yeah, that works. I was wrong. That works. It's fine. The study is an experiment. This study, or this study is an experiment, considering that the participants were randomly placed into two groups, decreased homework and same amount of homework. You should have mentioned the variables. So I don't. You should have, and you didn't say random. You said randomly placed. You should have said random assignment. So that's why the person got the point here. Is because they said random assignment, even though I think it's talking about independent and dependent variables. But that is part of an experiment. Um, it's a bit of a stretch. It says randomly placed. Do you need to use the academic vocabulary? Um, I would say I would give the point, but I don't know if you would get the point according to AP because you didn't say random assignment. It's the same thing. Uh, you should have said randomly assigned to the two independent two groups. But I get what You're saying so it's a stretch for me to say I don't know if they would give you the point. I would, but I don't know if they would. But it is talking about when an experiment has random assignment. So we're going to go ahead and say you get the point. An independent variable is the experimental factor that is manipulated. Good. In this case, the amount of homework is the independent variable because student stress levels depend on it. Great way to define it. Operational definition. You didn't leave a space here, but it's still not hard to read because you're grouping that together, and I think that still works. Operational definition makes it clear how the researcher should go about measuring the behavior or process. Okay, good enough. It sounds like a book definition, but I like it. The school administration, and it's clear, so it's not a big deal if you do. The school administration could describe the amount of homework as schoolwork given by the teacher to complete the homework due the next day. So you're measuring the amount of homework given that's due the next day. What about homework that I give you that's due 3 days from now? Is that not part of it? Like a project, is that not part of it? I would just get rid of the due the next day. I would say given by the teacher to complete at home. Um, over give a time frame. I guess it's fine. I just wouldn't say that. It just I'm nitpicking. Like if I was writing an experiment, I'm nitpicking what the time periods and stuff you're doing. But technically it works. Um, just like the only downside is it doesn't include like a project, so that would be homework and that would be stressful because a lot of you get stressed on projects. So don't forget those. It's still good though. I think it still gets the point. So point here, stretch on the point here. Dependent variable is the outcome factor that will change in response to the manipulation of the independent variable. Beautiful. The dependent variable depends on the independent variable. That is the definition. You've got to have that. Not part of your point, but it's helpful. Student stress levels are the dependent variable since the amount of homework will influence their levels. Perfect. The school's administration can define high stress levels as having the high and low. She should just say stress levels. High and low is important. You're measuring both. As having high inability to concentrate, anxiety, constant worrying, moodiness, isolation in class, sleep loss, and nervous habits. Low stress levels can be defined as little to no problems. I see what you did. You broke it into high and low stress. That's fine. I like that. Concentrating in class, stable emotions, competing in class. I like that. That's beautiful. I think it's a little bit difficult to measure those things, and you didn't say how you were going to measure them. You should have said all measured in a survey. But other than that, it's technically you are defining it, and how people choose to use their experiment. You're telling them what to measure. That's fine. That works. The only downside is you now have to have operational definitions of what is sleep loss. Is 6 hours normal for that person? Is 5 hours normal for that person? What is constant worrying? Were they constantly worrying when they're not stressed? How do you know? Um, what is anxiety for a person? What is inability to concentrate? Like not able to focus in class for 30 minutes, not able to focus on homework. Like you're giving a lot of things that then now have to be defined as well. The more you give, the more you have to define now later on. Not a big deal for the problem, but you're giving a lot. Here's a good one. What is moodiness? How do you define moodiness? How do you know a person's not naturally moody? So it's just difficult to control for those things that you're talking about now. Confounding variables can make experiments hard to monitor the actual effects being studied. These variables might produce another effect in the experiment. Good way. Again, I would say another effect on the dependent variable. A student might already be experiencing stress aside from homework amount. Label it as a confounding variable. They might already be experiencing it. That's tough. You're just saying stress is a confounding variable. They might have already had it. So a better way to say this would say they might have already been experiencing stress prior to this, and the prior stress only built on this stress, so they were already stressed before. But I think it counts, and I think I would still be giving it the point, but again, we need two, so we'll get there. The student might be placed in the group having less homework, but still show symptoms of increased stress levels attributed by the same amount of homework group. Another possible confounding variable in students. Yeah, but that's what the random assignment's for. If you're randomly assigning people to groups, then you're gonna get people in the lot of homework group that are already high stress, and you're gonna get people in the low group that are already high stress. The difference is over time, do the high group people experience more stress or the same amount of stress, and do the low group people, even if they're already high stress, do they go down more? So if you're measuring stress over time, if it's going down and they started out high, you're doing a good job. So you want that to happen. You want people of high stress to be in both groups. So that would not count. And I'm sorry, you do not get the point because you did not label two. It was already a stretch for the first one. You need to be talking about how something else affects the independent variable. The first one you should have said prior stress influences this. But the thing is, the question's asking about what is causing stress other than homework. So you're basically just saying stress is causing stress, and that is not a good explanation. And more stress does lead to, if you're already stressed, more stress doesn't help. It does get kind of like exponential function. It does increase a lot, but both of these are really bit of a stretch, and neither one of these gets the point. So I'm sorry, not great confounding variables. You need to be talking about something specific causing more stress other than stress. You're basically just saying stress. So 2 points here, 2 points here. So you're for sure getting 4. I said yes on this one, so 5. No on these last ones, sorry. But 4 for sure. Again, you're above the curve. This one is hard to read. Too many. I'm going to go really fast on these ones. So I believe that what makes Caesar Rodney School District experiment, an experiment. No, don't worry about spelling. You probably might not be able to see this. I should just zoom in. I should just do that. My apologies. They both have a control group and a group that undergoes the change. Do they have a control group? No, they don't. Plus, you would only need one control group. One control group where you didn't change anything. Again, this is a bad experiment because then you would just be changing one teacher and, anyways. But control group, they don't have that. I didn't see anything in there about control group. And the group that undergoes the change, they both. Wait, I think your wording's just throwing me off. They both have control group. No, there's just the one control group. The control group is the one that kept the same amount. So nobody increased homework. They have a control group, not both have a control group. They have a control group, yes, and that would be a piece of the experiment. So saying they have a control group would get you the point, but they don't. I don't know what you mean by both have a control group. They had one group that nothing had changed. That's control group. While the other group had the workload to reduce the stress level. So I think it gets the point because you talk about having a control group. The way you said it is wrong, but they get the point. This is the crucial part in conducting an experiment because without having a control group to go against the group undergoes the change, there would be no way to gather information to prove the thesis valid. Hypothesis, not a thesis. I guess it's a thesis. Valid, but whatever. The independent variable is the thing that changes. They both change. And that sounds more like a dependent variable the way you're writing it. It's the thing that you change, that you control or manipulate. So off to a slow bad start on that. The workload would be the thing that changed. The amount of homework, not workload. Workload is including class. Make sure you're talking about just homework. The workload would be the thing that changed. Sorry, no point. The operational definition is the thing. I know what you mean, but it's very ambiguous what you're saying. The operational definition is the thing that they use to calculate the data. No, I don't think so. You don't use a definition to calculate it. It's the way you define something in order. What do you use a calculator to calculate data, or you use a p-score or z-score or probably p-value. Um, you don't use it to calculate the data. You use it to collect data. It doesn't calculate data. It just collects data, I guess. So sorry, not very good on that one. In this scenario, operational definition for the independent variable would be, I should say could be, because there's options, but not a big deal. The workload that got depleted by teachers. No, you didn't define. You didn't define how they were measuring how much homework was given. How are they measuring the amount of homework? So again, you're just talking about measure how much homework was given over a week, or how much a teacher gave homework before, and then cutting that in half now. That is the dependent variable. So, or the independent variable. Operational definition of amount of homework. You're trying to define amount of homework. That's what you're trying to define. That is the variable, the amount of homework. So you need to define how are they measuring amount of homework. You didn't define how much amount of homework was. Again, talking about homework given over a certain time period, or amount of projects given, or amount of book reports or books to read or whatever, something. The dependent variable is what is affected by the independent variable. That's good. The student stress level would be the dependent variable. The operational, that's fine. The operational definition for the dependent variable would be their full workload as well as their assignments they were given. No, it just says homework. That's not true. Plus, you're just telling me, again, you just restated what the dependent variable was. You didn't define the operational definition. Operational definition means how is it put into operation? How are you measuring the amount of homework given? How are you measuring now the amount of stress students have? So no, you didn't say how they're measuring anything. You just restated what it was, stress levels. Oh, actually, you also just said the independent variable. That's the independent variable, not the dependent variable. No, the operational definition for the dependent variable would be the amount of stress students feel over time, from day to day, each week, on a survey, on a Likert scale, amount of moodiness or whatever, like the other person said. So you didn't define anything. So again, no point. Confounding, not confiding. Confounding variables are the things that also affect the dependent variable outcome. Good. In this case, the classes that students could affect their stress levels as well as what is going on. Again, you didn't describe anything. You just said what they could be. You had to describe them. The question says describe. You're not describing anything. You're just stating what they are. But I think it's a lot of people's mistake. They think that that's not a description. So you could say the classes that the students have could affect their stress levels. So again, like the other person said, but they did bad on job on. They just said that what it was. What classes students have could affect their stress levels, as in what you should be writing is as in one student could have more AP classes and that's more stressful already, so that affects their stress levels aside from the workload. And the other thing is you said, well, that's what's going on in the student's personal life, as well as what's going on in the student's personal life could affect the stress levels. That one would be pretty good, but again, you didn't define it. You got to say what's going on in a student's personal life, like breakup or divorce or whatever else, or whatever else could cause more stress. So again, no point on that one because the first one's bad, and you just kind of said what they were. So 1 point, 2 points for dependent variable. You only got 2 points on this. I'm sorry. So that was a rough one. Sorry. One aspect of the study, I'm going to finish this here. One aspect of the study that makes this experiment is the manipulation to see its effect on another. Manipulation of what? In the study, the amount of homework is manipulated. Okay, to see, but you just said see its effect on another. Manipulation to see its effect on another. That's not a sentence that makes sense. I'm sorry. Is manipulation of variables to see their effect on one another? Variable, or one another, or another variable. You did another what? Sorry. You should basically get rid of this. In this study, the amount of homework is manipulated to see how it affects. One aspect of the study that makes the experiment is you can just cut it. You can just cut it right here and say this part. Right there. Just get rid of everything. What I have highlighted, that's all you need. It makes an experiment. The amount of homework is manipulated to see if it would affect student stress levels, whether increase or not. Manipulation of variables is what you need. That's fine. The independent variable of an experiment is what is changed or altered to measure its effect on dependent variable. Good. Independent variables decrease the amount of homework in order to measure this level of stress. Fine. Point. So point here and point here. Explain one possible. Do not do this. Don't put this stuff in here, guys. Get rid of it. It's just extra. Just leave spaces. Don't need this. Operational definition is the physical way that a researcher will identify or measure the variable. Fine. In this study, the decrease of homework could be measured by operational definition, less homework problems than before, or by less homework over time overall. Perfect. That's fine. Talk about how they're measuring it. Less homework over time or less problems on homework. That's fine. That works great. So they both have 3 points so far. The dependent variable is the variable expected to respond to the change brought by the independent variable in the study. The dependent variable would be the student's stress levels. Fine. The dependent variable is the way the variable is measured in an experiment. In this study, the student's stress levels could be measured by their blood pressure, body temperature. Body temperature is not related to stress. That could be related to sickness or something. Blood pressure could be related to other things too, but blood pressure is a good one, but not body temperature. I don't think stress necessarily increases your body temperature. I don't think so. The reason that stress can be measured this way is because people often experience perspiration. So perspiration is not body temperature. Just because you're stressed doesn't make you perspirate either. I don't know, man. I don't think so. I think it gets the point, but I don't think you need. Again, like I said in the video, over-explaining is not going to hurt you as long as you don't contradict yourself. So that's fine. Still get the point. Confounding variables are variables. Again, this is really short. I don't think you're going to describe them. That's my guess right now. Confounding variables are variables that the researcher does not always consider. Variables that could skew the data or result of experiments. That's fine. Two possible confounding variables are lack of sample size and the lack of repetition of the experiment. No. Lack of repetition of the experiment would be low reliability. Yeah, low reliability. Not validity. Low reliability. That's separate. That's if you're doing another experiment. If it can't be done, that means it's not reliable. That means something in the experiment was wrong, which this experiment is. But that's reliability, not about. That's not a confounding variable. But again, you're not describing them. And sample size. No, I mean it talks about telling half the teachers. That's a good sample. You're using your entire school basically. That's a really good sample size. What more could you measure? Another school? Another school has different demographics. So both of those are not confounding variables. This does not get a point. Again, make sure you're describing them. Confounding variables are things that affect the variable inside that study. These are outside the study. These are problems in the study, but they are not confounding variables. Um, those are problems, but they're not confounding variables. Those are separate problems. Sorry, my nose really itches. Uh, Again, so now I want to come up with confounding variables. Uh, Stress in the person's life from uh, personal problems like breakup. So explain it, describe it like a breakup or divorce, or um, having more AP classes than other students might already cause them more stress, or um, uh, a teacher already gives a lot of homework. That's a confounding variable that would be already more stress. So the teacher already has a lot of homework, so half is still more than most other teachers. So the teacher that you have the teacher that you have is a confounding variable. Um, a confounding variable with a study is um, what classes you're in, what teachers you have, uh, what classes you're likely to take because you're more of a go-getter and you want to get the AP classes. That impacts your stress levels. Um, what if you're sick or not? If you've missed school or if you just moved, if you had a breakup, those are all different confounding variables, and you can the personal life one is one that you could break up into a ton of different variables. So you're kind of shooting yourself in the foot by using it for one. Break it up and just say the person went through a breakup and that's a stressor, and the person just moved. Those are both personal life, but you can break them up into two different confounding variables. There you go. This is 45 minutes long. That's all I've got for you guys. If you have any questions about graduation or anything, please be in touch with me. I can't do Zoom videos anymore, so I thought about doing on some videos with you guys, but I'm going to do another one of these Friday or Saturday with your next homework. Remember, there's only 2 pieces of homework a week, and Friday I might change that. I don't know, because once I know more about the AP test, that'll change what we're going to do for the rest of the year. Mr. White out.